Welcome to Pitch Perfect. We're a female-driven flesh and blood channel hosted by myself, Melody, and Elaine. Say hi, Elaine.
Hi.
Awesome. This week on our Pitch Perfect pod, we are joined by a very prominent member of our flesh and blood community. Please welcome a very highly anticipated guest to the show, Yuki Lee Bender. Kia ora, Yuki.
Hey everyone, pleasure to be on the show. Really looking forward to, sitting down and chatting and yeah, just talking with you too.
Yeah, we're super
Awesome.
excited to have you here. And I think a lot of the community is too. That was like when we started this podcast, we are like, what do you guys want to see? And they were all like, Yuki. Like, okay. we'll try and make that happen. So I'm excited it's finally happening.
Yes, yeah. So actually, before yesterday, we were talking about, usually we ask our guests, how did we meet? We've never actually met you, but I said to
Yeah.
Elaine, haven't you met Yuki before? Surely at, ProQuest and all these events you go to. And Elaine's like, no, Elaine's been too shy to talk to you, Yuki.
That's true. That is true. I'm like, I run around, I talk to everyone at these events, and I've seen you in passing in New Jersey and at Vegas. And I was too shy both times to introduce myself. I'm like, I don't want to ruin her focus or little starstruck. But yeah, so it's nice to finally actually sit down and get to talk to you.
Yeah, no, it's nice. It's nice to talk to you too. I saw you briefly at Vegas too, but I think you were chatting with someone, so I was like, oh, maybe I'll.
I remember I was like sitting with Flake and a few other people, and then like Flake like waved you over, and y'all had a brief conversation. And I was just like,
Yeah, I was
"That's
hoping to
Yuki."
come back, and then it was like I realized I had a lot of running around to do. So
Yeah, I think I actually went and took a nap like right after that.
At the event.
I left and went and took a
Oh,
nap because they had like made plans for after, and then there was like the huge uprising draft, and I was like, I gotta go take a nap right now because I wasn't playing in any events in that moment anyway.
mm.
yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, Yuki. Um, Obviously, one of the first questions we ask is just to get a lay of the land is how did you actually get into Flesh and Blood? Is this your first TCG?
It is not. So I came from Magic, and
Mm.
I played Magic as a kid growing up, from when I was like 4 years old in the '90s, early '90s, like fourth edition.
Ah.
Maybe 5 years old. I was pretty little though. I was little enough that my babysitter's son introduced me to Magic the Gathering, and I was like, "This is really cool. I don't know how to play it." And I brought a manual home. I'm like, "Mom, teach me how to play." And she did, and so that was really cool, and like that was like a very casual experience. And then I took a big gap. I kind of played through school, took a big gap, and then got into back into card games kind of around when Hearthstone came out, and Magic Arena got me back into Magic, and now Flesh and Blood I got to through early on LSVs that had some videos with Hayden, just like gameplay videos, and I think I actually found the exact one like recommended to me on YouTube a little bit ago, and I shouted them out. And I'm like, wow, it's like wild to think that this is only at the time was only about a year ago, and just like how far things have come from like the early like very kind of rough YouTube videos to like there's so much content now and so much about the game, and we've had our some major events callings, pro tours. So but yeah, initially I just saw LSP play it on YouTube with Hayden, and I was like, wow, this game looks really fun. I want to try it out. I tried it on TTS with a friend, and then I bought cards not too long after. I didn't even really know what to do with them. Like I knew how to play the game, but I wasn't really sure if you could even buy card. Like I didn't know like anyone was playing with the cards, even though you could just buy them locally recently. I was like, I don't know if there's events or anything. There was online armories, but yeah, it took me a little bit to actually get into um, organized play. Initially, it was just playing with a friend on TTS and sort of feeling out all the classes, seeing what they do. Yeah.
And during what release was that, or how long ago was that, Yuki?
That was probably around. I probably had my first foray in like kind of right around the start of Crucible.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and again, like during that time, it was pretty casual, like mostly just like trying all the heroes and seeing what they were. And I think I was only playing Blitz at the time. CC was just like too much. Like the games were taking a long time, even just playing Blitz, because we really like to think through the lines. Um, and then I'd say my first, like when I started getting product was when Crucible First Edition was available in North America, so a little bit after release. I actually have some like a little bit of Crucible First Ed. I pulled like a cold foil Perch Grapplers, for example, was one of the first cards I pulled. So that was really cool. And then I guess when I started getting into organized play was more around like the Monarch time, like Monarch pre-release. Just before that, maybe like a few weeks before that, I played like 3 or 4 armories, and then Monarch pre-release happened. Yeah.
And so were you still playing Magic at the time? Like what kind of do you only play Flesh and Blood now, or
So yeah, I was definitely still playing Magic at the time. Primarily played limited for Magic, like that was my
Okay.
go-to. I was starting to learn a little bit about standard and modern and the different constructed formats, but I was never particularly good at them. Like I was maybe like 50% in those formats, maybe worse, honestly. I did a lot of losing. But I fancied myself a pretty decent limited player. These days though, it's mostly Flesh and Blood. I'll play Magic with some friends. Like I've drafted double masters a couple of times with friends. Um, I'll play Commander occasionally with friends, but I don't really have time for Magic and Flesh and Blood at the same time.
it's a big
I'll
commitment, right?
say
Just Flesh and Blood
understandable.
by itself is crazy, a crazy amount of time. And so
Mhm.
you kind of talked to it a bit, which is, I was going to ask how successful you were in Magic. Um, but I'm really interested, or we're really interested in why you decided to invest more time and sort of commit yourself to Flesh and Blood as opposed to Magic, which you've been playing since you were 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah, so it was a number of things. So Magic I had sort of gotten back into around, I guess, like Guilds of Ravnica era, so just like 3 or 4 years ago. And that was sort of my first jump into organized play. Like I didn't even know there was pre-releases or events at stores when I was little. That wasn't something that I did. Um, so that was sort of like a whole new thing for me. And yeah, I had played like a number of Grand Prix and a number of what would you call them? Like PTQs, or like ProQuests essentially.
Yeah.
And I had done okay. Like I had some like X1 finishes where I bubbled out. I think I cashed a GP, but I had only played really like a handful of events. So even though I'm like sort of in some ways my relationship with Magic is funny because in some ways I'm like a very invested player. I played it for a long time and I feel like the game comes naturally to me because I learned it when I was so little. But at the same
Mm.
time, I sort of only took it seriously as an adult for a very small amount of time. So I think I was like less invested than some people. And as COVID happened, there was sort of just like this big downturn in organized play and events in Magic. And I had a little bit more time to do other things. And I tried Flesh and Blood. I really liked it. And I think for a long time I was still playing both games, but maybe the big changing point for me was probably Canadian Nationals after winning that event, which honestly came as a huge surprise. I was hoping to do well, but I was shocked that I actually won. And at that moment, I was like, well, I sort of like I'm at a crossroads here. I have a choice of like, if I want to take this game seriously, this feels like the best time to do it. And if I don't want to, that's okay. But I sort of need to make a conscious decision right now. And I decided to spend more time on Flesh and Blood since I've been enjoying it, and I just haven't really looked back. Yeah.
Yay, we're glad you stuck around.
Yeah, definitely. And congratulations on your
Yes.
Canadian Nats win. When I, you know, my boyfriend had been trying to get me into this game seriously since Crucible came out. But it wasn't until Everfest came out when I started like actually taking a lot of interest in it. And one of his selling points to me was like, "There's a female one Canadian ads," and I was like, "Really?" And
Ooh.
that was part of it. That's like, okay, I want to try it out. There's females in here. kicking
That's
ass and
awesome.
taking names, and that was you. So look at us now.
That's awesome. Thanks. I always like hearing like how people get into the game, or just like anytime people are like, "Oh, I read your article and it helped," or I wanted to try this hero because I saw you play it and it looked like fun and now I enjoy it. Like that's always so meaningful. So I'm glad that you shared that.
And there's a lot of that. There's entire Lexi clans that are dedicated to your deck.
Yes, yes. Every time you come out with a new video and I go to an event and get beat by Alexi, I'm always like, is this Yuki's list? They're like, of course it's Yuki's list. Okay, I'll accept it.
So, from an inclusivity perspective, Yuki, you've come from Magic the Gathering. It sounds like, you've come from quite a competitive sort of standpoint over there. What are the differences that you found between Magic and Flesh and Blood as a woman as well? Like,
Yeah. So I'll kind of preface it with saying that I think that my experience in Flesh and Blood is unusual, and I'll talk about why. But
cool.
I would say that like certainly as a woman in gaming, like playing I used to play video games like fairly seriously as well. Like I was never actually like super competitive, but I'd say that I was always like pretty high ranked and would like practice with people who are pretty competitive in things like League of Legends or StarCraft 2. So I think in those spaces as well as Magic the Gathering, I've definitely like it feels like you almost have like something to prove where like you're not
Mm,
always taken super seriously by everyone. There's lots of people who do. I think actually the majority of people are pretty good, but there's enough people who can be a little, I don't know, condescending or patronizing, and those people really kind of stand out. So I think it's not really like a majority, but it happens like frequently enough that it's like a pain point and a major annoyance.
Hmm.
Um, so I've definitely had some of that in Magic, and my local community is pretty good, but sometimes there are like offhand comments, and I find a lot of it is like it's not even necessarily directed at me specifically. It's more just like the banter that they have with their friend, and they're using language that isn't inclusive, and I understand it's like, yeah, this isn't meant to offend me, but at the same time, like I'm here and this is kind of weird and uncomfortable. So there's a lot of
mm,
like those kind of interactions more so than people like intentionally trying to be rude, I
Right,
think.
like it.
and
They're not
targeting
like
you.
they're not like targeting, but they are just in their
Mm,
language making it feel like almost like a boys' club, I guess, where it's like,
yeah.
okay,
Yeah, like you just don't feel the most welcome. I've had like a little bit
yeah.
of that in Flesh and Blood and some Discords as well. Like just like reading the Discord chat, I'm like, this is not a Discord I particularly want to take place in, just because of like the type of like joking around that's going on or whatever is not. I
Hmm.
don't know. I just don't enjoy it.
Mm,
Yeah.
And doesn't feel welcoming. So I've had a bit of that, but I'd say like by and far my Flesh and Blood experience has been really positive. But I think that there's like I do want to put like an asterisk there of there's like a lot of unusual things. My local community is like amazing, and I think it skews like a little bit older, and especially initially on like a lot of people who have a lot, like they have careers and they have a lot going on in their life, and then they're just like I'd say they're quite like mature and like well educated and together. Um,
mhm.
and we had been playing online armory for a long time before we ever played in person, so I felt like within my own local community it's always been super respectful, but I also feel like maybe like my community is particularly good that way, which is awesome. So shout out to the local Vancouver community. But
Represent.
yeah, but also, like the first time I traveled and played outside of my community was actually at Canadian Nationals. And at that event, like I was definitely not on anyone's radar. And I don't think anybody like from my province, from BC, was really. Like a lot of the big names were from Ontario. Like at the time, like Dante had just topped multiple callings, and
Yeah.
like there was like other people who had been putting up results or had been practicing with the big names, and like everybody knew about them. So like I don't think I was on anyone's radar, but I also just think that like a lot of people weren't, and I didn't really take that personally. But like that was my first event outside my community, and it was a big one, and I happened to win it. So
You won it, all right.
That's a
So,
big
so
that's a big event to win too.
yeah.
yeah, like it kind of shapes, I think that's kind of shaped and informed the rest of my experience in Flesh and Blood, right? Because the next time I traveled, I went down to Portland and I was suddenly like, wait, strangers know who I am and come up and say hi to me. Like this is really
Yeah.
weird. But
Celebrity, Yuki.
strange. There's a little bit of that though, and it's not something I'm at all used to. I'm like slowly kind of getting used to it, but it's still weird. Um, but yeah, so I think like I haven't really had much of that in Flesh and Blood, but I think it also like is probably skewed by me being somewhat of a known player. And I think I also think that like there's a number of things about my win that maybe make it like a little bit more memorable. Like just the fact that like I was the only female national champion, I think like stands out in people's heads a little bit. And I think that I won on what at the time was like a bit of an underdog also kind of stood out. So I think all of that has kind of like culminated into me being like a little bit fortunate that I'm like as well recognized and respected as I am. I feel like sometimes like people sometimes I'm almost like, oh, like maybe I'm just like in the right place at the right time. Like not that, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like I got a little fortunate and people are like overhyping me a little bit or something, but I don't know.
Oh, I don't think you're fortunate. I think it takes skill to
Yeah.
win a nationals, Yuki. And you came out of nowhere and blindsided everyone, which is even better, I think.
It truly is amazing. And watching you play at like the pro tour, watching your matches, just like the intelligence and thought that goes into everything you did. I mean, I was blown away. So we are going to talk a little bit about your experience at the pro tour because we had a lot of questions about just your gameplay overall. So we're going to move into that.
Mhm.
Just a little bit. Also, quick shout out to Matapod on Twitter and in our Discord. He's a local of mine. He's a really talented Lexi player. He definitely looks up to you a lot, and so he helped us come up with the questions for this section. So I just wanted to shout him out real quick. Okay, so first question I have is I know that you were like tweeting before Pro Tour. You know, felt like the world was watching all the players before Pro Tour, and you were talking about maybe like you were kind of in between Lexi, which we know you played, and another deck. So like what decks were you in between? And are you happy that you chose to play Lexi at the Pro Tour?
Yeah, so I would say that like before the ban announcement, Lexi wasn't really on my radar at all. I felt like she had some problems in the format. Like Awakening in Starvo was just such a big problem, and Channel as well. Like there's like just number of cards that just made that matchup really hard. Um, and so she wasn't really on my radar. I had been thinking about playing Prism. I actually had won a Pro Quest in season one playing Prism, and I played Prism through a lot of Monarch. So I'd say like Prism and Lexi have been my main two heroes.
Okay.
So Prism was like a comfort pick, and one that I was pretty sure I was on for a long time actually. But towards the end of our and so I guess rewinding a bit. So when the ban announcement happened, um, I decided to look at Lexi again because Awakening was gone and because Autumn's Touch was gone. I figured that might make the Starvo matchup a little bit more tenable. And my idea was basically, if we can have a decent Starvo and Chain matchup and an okay Prism matchup, that's actually a pretty good deck because those still seem like the three big decks in the format for
Yeah,
sure.
definitely.
So that was kind of the idea behind Lexi, and we came to a build very similar to the one on the PT like pretty quickly. My idea was basically to combine Fuseless Lexi with Ice Lexi to have some of the disruption in the chain. And also some of that like trickles over into Starvo and is also relevant and other aggro matchups as well. So that was kind of the idea behind the deck. and then we were sort of undecided. Like the deck seemed okay. The Prism matchup was really, really poor though. Like I had been just doing nothing but losing to Prism. And I think up until about a week before, we were pretty much on Prism. Like that's what we thought we were going to bring. But I did some testing with shout out to Will Harrison, who played Chain and just absolutely destroyed me. I think I did win one game. We only played about 4 games, and I think I won one of them, which doesn't sound awful. But the game that I won, I think I had done 3 Arclight Sentinels all in a row. Like everything went perfectly, and I still very nearly lost. And I went, wow, my high roll almost loses, and all the other games are not close. Like I don't really need to see more of this matchup. Like I understand that it's really bad. Um, so I think I realized that like that top end of Chain was a lot worse than I had originally thought, and that kind of made us go back to Lexi. And in the sort of like 2 days before, we actually kind of figured out the Prism matchup and made some really big breakthroughs, and that really solidified the choice. So yeah, going into the Pro Tour is actually feeling surprisingly confident, even though like if you ask me like 4 days before the Pro Tour, I'd be freaking out. So it kind of worked out, but it was like all very last minute developments. And yeah, I'm happy that I brought the deck. I think that it performed really well. I had a really good start and didn't. I mean, I did well. I'm happy with the top 32. Still slightly disappointed. I wasn't able to make top 8 after being, I think I was like 9-1 at one point, and I just needed a couple more wins, but I couldn't quite get there. So that was a little disappointing, but I wouldn't change anything. I think it was a great choice for the event, and I think that it performed pretty well. I think everybody that I tested with, we all made day 2. So 2 of us made day 2 of the Pro
That's
Tour.
crazy.
Mia made day 2 of the calling, so it was hard to fault the deck. Like it did really well.
Yeah, definitely. So in the current meta, do you still think that the Ice Fusion build for Lexi is like the best, or now that the meta's changing, do you think switching to like a Lightning Fuse or a No Fuse would be stronger?
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky. I'm not entirely sure what I think about Lexi. I'm sort of looking to see what happens at the Calling Utrecht to see if like the meta kind of solidifies just a little bit. Right now, the meta game is so wide, and I think it's a little bit hard for Lexi because one of her biggest strengths is that she just has such a variety in how she can be built, and she can really sort of target specific heroes and matchups. Like I think if you want to build her to beat just one hero, she can beat just about any hero in the game. But sometimes getting the spread of like multiple heroes is challenging.
Yeah. And the meta's kind of like a Wild West right now. It's
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's something that doesn't help Lexi. So what I think she's still pretty good, but I think it does make it harder to build, like to know what the right deck is. My approach has been sort of similar to the list that I took to a Pro Tour, maybe like a little bit less ice. Blizzard Bolts have been like kind of mopey. Not been super impressed with that card this metagame. And so yeah, just kind of like 15-ish ice cards, maybe cutting like 1 or 2 sets of Blizzard Bolts and adding in Arctic Incarceration has been really, really good. Just being like 3 Frostbites all on its own is amazing. And
Yes.
Hypothermia is like a card I go back and forth on. When it's good, it's really good, and sometimes it just doesn't do anything. So, I mean, I think the fact that it's a blue helps a lot, and you should probably have some copies in your deck, but I'm not. Yeah, I've been kind of bouncing around between lists a little bit. I know a lot of people have been asking for a list. I'll probably be sharing something soon. But I do. Yeah, so I think Lexi has potential. I think that you should still be ice because there's some very aggressive decks like Fi and Viscerai. But I think that you need to slant fairly aggressively because, in particular, like Dromai is a really hard matchup, especially if you're more ice heavy. And so if Dromai is in the metagame, you actually need to be like even closer to a fuseless build than my Pro Tour list was to have a reasonable chance. Because yeah, that matchup is quite challenging.
So I have a question. So these are one of Metapod's questions. So he's provided quite a few. But how do you mentally prepare for participating in big events like Pro Tour nationals?
Yeah, great question. So there's a few things that go on. I think the biggest one is just trying to rest, like make sure I have a good sleep, make sure I have a good schedule. If there's a time difference, giving yourself like time to adjust to that. For New Jersey, it's only a 3 hour time difference, but I had intentionally shifted my schedule just like a little bit earlier and had done like a week before I was doing some morning testing sessions, like when the pro tour would be starting. And I'm kind of glad I did because when a friend of mine and I sat down and played, we're like, oh man, it's so early. Like we're not used to playing Fab at what was like, I don't know, what was it, 5 or 6 in the morning for us? It was weird. So I think doing that can help. And I think that like taking some time off right before the event, as hard as that is like really important. You don't want to, I think like, especially the day before, like you don't want to be, going all out on testing to try and get that little bit more practice and then just be burned out for the event. I think just like making sure you're well rested and in a good mind space is really important. Having food and healthy food is super important. I usually like to get like trail mix or fruit or things like that, just so I'm able to eat between rounds. It's like not the same as a meal, but it really adds up and makes a huge. And then the last one is sort of, I guess it has to do with like my mindset going into the event. I usually like to focus on like performance rather than results. So those might sound similar, but like so my goal is never like sometimes I'll have things like I would love to day two, or like I would love to try and make top eight, or like for the pro tour, like I was like I'd be very happy if I got a PTI. Like if I top 32 and got a PTI, I'd feel very, very happy with that. And it's like okay to have that, but that wasn't really my goal. My goal for the event was I want to feel like I did a good job in testing and brought a deck that gives me a good chance to perform well. And in the games that I actually play at the event, I want to play as tight as possible and as cleanly as possible. And I want to make like the best decisions that give me the highest chance of winning that I can. And if I do make a mistake, I'm gonna try and shake that off and do the best that I can from there forward. So it's really like more focused on that like step by step, decision by decision, and game by game kind of process. And because ultimately, like we're playing a card game, there's variance in what you draw and who you're paired against, and it's not always in your control if you do well. And I think that like sometimes that like mental aspect of like, oh man, I was hoping to day two, but now I'm like starting in 0-2 is like that can really kind of dig yourself in the hole. And if you just focus sort of on your decision making and trying to play as well as you can, I think if you keep doing that and you're doing your job in testing and you're playing well, I think that you're going to give yourself the best odds to get. Like I think results will follow if you keep doing that and you keep trying. Like you're not
And
that likely
refining
to
your
win a
game, right?
specific. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I think the events come with playing really, really well, but it's like your chance to win a specific event is never that good. Like events are made to make losers and not made to make winners, if that makes sense. Like there's one
Yes, it
person who
does.
wins the event and there's a lot of people who lose. So
Yes.
yeah, just try to not get too attached to the results. And I think that's like maybe the biggest thing.
Yeah, that's a really good way like to look at it mentally because I mean, it's easy to feel disappointed and like sad after any event, but I always just have to think like, okay, I played really well. That's like the most I can ask for is that like you said, and play a tight game, a clean game, no matter what the results are.
Yeah.
And to get learnings out of the game,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's a nice
Every
one
game
too.
is a
Like
Yeah.
learning.
yeah, no, for sure. I love that, and I feel like that too. Sometimes if I walk away from an event, I'm like, well, I learned a lot about what I can do in a certain matchup or preparation or whatever. That's like valuable in and of itself because I think the goal is not to do well. For me, at least, the goal is not to do well at like a specific event. It's to do well overall across however long I end up playing Flesh and Blood for. So one event is just it feels
One
like a
of
big
many.
deal, but it's not. It's just one event, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
All right, this is another one from Matterpod, but are there any statistics or analytics done when you're deck building? And if so, which ones have like provided the greatest insight to you for you?
Yeah, there's a little bit. I definitely focus on, I usually try and focus on sort of key ratios around um, things like blue count or like arrow count in Lexi is really important, like balancing your arrows versus your ice cards versus like the ones that aren't either. And all of that is really important. So mostly what I do there is use a hypergeometric calculator, which basically
What? What is that, Yuki?
you can Google it. It's
I need to.
you can Google it. They're actually very easy to use once you kind of like learn the templating of it.
I'm
But
Googling it right now while we're
basically,
talking.
yeah. So basically, it tells you it's really useful for simulating things like drawing cards from a deck because typically you'll have like a population size, so that'd be the number of cards in your deck, like 60 cards,
Yeah.
and then you can put in like a specific type that you're looking for. So if you're looking for arrow cards and you want to know how likely am I to draw one or more arrows, you can say, well, I have 36 arrows in my deck out of 60 total cards, and I'm drawing 4 cards, and then it will tell you what the chances are of drawing exactly one or more, 0, all of that kind of stuff. So you can look it up. There's like multiple ones
I
online that
just
will
have. I've
do
just Googled it. Yep.
all the work
Oh
for
my,
you.
wow.
And I think that that's like a great starting point because it kind of informs like how often these things are going to be happening. And it's sort of, there's like a bit of like an art there of like, I think like nothing's going to be as high as you would really want it to be, but you're trying to get like the best balance of all the important things, and you're trying to ask questions like a big one for Lexi specifically is like how often am I going to be drawing no arrows, because those hands like often just kind of lose you the game or make you fall way behind. So like selecting for like some very like key things like that I think is really important in deck building. But that's really like the main one is that hypergeometric calculator, just to calculate different percentages. You can do it for things like fusion and like your blue count as well, because you probably want at least one blue per hand. So you could say I have 18 blues in my deck out of 60 cards. How likely am I to draw a blue? You could then include yellows in there and think about like how bad it is if I draw yellow, how like, because some decks function very well off yellows and some don't, so it's like another consideration. um, but that's the key one. um, Other than that, I think I largely go off of feel. So the hypergeometric calculator sort of like helps me make sure that I'm close. It like gives me like a rough idea of where I want to be. And then I think there's like definitely like a little bit of wiggle room where I'll play some games and I'll be like, I feel like I'm like a little bit light on blues consistently. So like maybe I should add a blue, or maybe I should like find a way to reduce my curve a little bit, like have cheaper cards on average. So yeah, there's different approaches, but I think it's like a mix of feel as well as a little bit of like math behind it as well.
Awesome.
I love that.
Okay.
I'm so going to try that out. I've got that now saved as a bookmark. Thank you.
I think we'll do one more gameplay question and then we'll move on looking at the time. So, last one is when you're trying to figure out, and like you're doing testing, you're trying to figure out how to hedge into a non-favorable matchup. Where do you start in that process of trying to figure out? I know you talked a little bit about this when we talked about how you chose a deck for Pro Tour with the Prism matchup and everything, but like where does that process begin?
Yeah. So I actually wrote an article about this a while ago on Red Riot, but what my main thought process is when I'm trying to build to beat like a certain matchup, like if I'm working on the Prism matchup, I will try and think about what 60 card deck can beat Prism. So I'll kind of throw like almost everything I have like aside and just try and build a 60 that beats Prism. And the idea here is like just figuring out like, can it be done? And what are the key cards, right? And then once I have that, I guess there's two things that can happen. I can figure out, yes, I can, and then how do I kind of make that congruent with like the other cards I have in my deck for other matchups? Or the other possible outcome is I actually can't find a 60 that beats Prism, so now I need to make a decision. Either I need to bring another deck because I can't beat Prism, or I can give up on my Prism matchup and hope to avoid it and just focus on all my other matchups. But I think like starting from if I just dedicate my deck to beating this matchup, what does that look like is like a really good litmus test. Because sometimes you can be like, oh, I'm going to add like 3 cards and see if that works. And then, oh, it doesn't work. So I'll try these 3 more cards. And you can kind of like waste a lot of time finicking around trying to like make it fit into your 80 card deck. Whereas if you just test a 60, you answer questions a lot faster. That being said, like sometimes I might not go completely off the rails. Like if I know, for example, for the Pro Tour, I knew that I wanted to have a good chain matchup. And so I wanted to be an Ice Lexi deck. And so even though I was willing to have a lot of room, I wasn't going to go into like a pure lightning deck, for example. Like I wasn't going to go that far. Like, so I knew it was kind of ice, but maybe I can cut down on some of the ice elements and go more aggressive or sideboard some number of lightning cards. So keep it like kind of realistic, but as long as you can have something that is like somewhat resembles the deck, even if it's quite far off, I think is a great place to start. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've never thought about it that way, and I probably will start thinking about it that way because that's really smart to figure out. Okay, this deck can win the matchup, but like actually what lines and cards are doing the most work, and then try and fit that into your original deck. It's a really good idea.
Yeah, I often like to think of like when rather than thinking of like I'm sideboarding, like here's my main deck and I'm sideboarding for each of these matchups, I often like to think of it more along the lines of here, like this deck, I have like different 60 card decks for each of my matchups. Like this is like, even though like it's all one deck, it's like here's my 60 card deck for Chain, here's my 60 card deck for Prism. They might have like very different focuses. They might have like pretty different configurations. Like sometimes your deck might vary by like 10 cards or something. And even though it's like technically all part of the same 80, I think like keeping in mind that you have like a different deck and a different game plan for that matchup can be a little bit liberating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We're gonna move on from gameplay. I hope that was enough for all of our listeners.
That was awesome.
Yeah, but we want to talk a little bit more about the female experience in Flesh and Blood and in TCGs and gaming in general. So you kind of touched on this already when we talked about like the difference between coming from Magic to Flesh and Blood. But this was one of my questions for you because personally, like when I got into the gaming space as a woman, I, like you said, I felt like I had like something more to prove, or that I wasn't being taken like as seriously as my male counterparts. Like when going to tournaments, sitting down across from a male, I wasn't always being taken as seriously as I would have liked to have been. So like,
Yeah.
did you experience your like this when you got into Flesh and Blood? And do you? I doubt you do, but do you still like? Have you ever since winning nationals felt like that again, or was like winning nationals you were kind of like, okay, well, now everyone is taking me seriously in competitive play, despite being a female?
Yeah. So I think that for the most part, I haven't experienced too much of it in Flesh and Blood specifically, like in other games, for sure, all the time. In Flesh and Blood specifically, like mostly online and in Discords, and again, like not directed at me, but just sort of like generally feeling unwelcome. Let's see, since nationals, I have had it happen sort of like once or twice. Um, and it was like with people who were also like kind of new to the game. Um, so it was like a bit of it was just a weird experience. And then their friend like coming up and being like, "Oh, you just played so and so," and they're like, "Oh," there's kind of like that deer in the headlights moment. So it's always like a little bit weird, but this only really happened once or twice, and I think it was like on the pretty mild side. Like I think they were like part of it was just them trying to like remember all their stuff, not so much like they were being kind of particular about like priority windows and stuff because they were like Prism. But I think some amount of it was just them trying to like also remember their own priority windows and not just like trying to tell me. So I think it was like a combination of both, and I try not to take it too personally. Um, but yeah, for the most part, I've been pretty insulated from it in Flesh and Blood. But I will say that when I have experienced that, in general, I usually try to take that as like it's almost like motivation for me. It's like, oh, now I really want to beat this person. Like, I'm gonna make sure that I play extra good because like, this is not okay, and I'm gonna show them. Like, I always try to like take it as a challenge and like turn it into something positive rather than
Mm.
like let it bring me down. And I guess like if you are a woman in gaming and you are like finding it intimidating, I think that like finding that group of people that are like supportive and you really enjoy spending time with and like are your friends and can share that experience with you is super important because like ultimately I think you're gonna like no matter who you are, you might have I've had plenty of unpleasant experiences, like not even necessarily related to gender, and I think you're gonna have some of that when you interact with other people.
Yeah.
But I think if you have like a core group that you can like if something happens and then you can like go back and like talk to them in between rounds and like kind of like calm yourself down or just like feel a bit better, like it makes a huge difference. And I think like for me that is like the biggest thing is just having that, that friend group that is not like that because you're always going to face a little bit of adversity, and having some support is really nice.
Yeah, good support network. So, in your experience as a woman, you're an established and very well respected part of our community, Yuki. What advice do you have for others to create a space where women do feel safe and included?
Yeah. So I think it will depend. I think it depends. Like, what makes me feel welcome is not necessarily the same as everyone else. But for me, like, one of the biggest things is just around, like, making sure that your language and your behavior and, like, the things that you are saying are just, like, not going to be putting someone off. Like, you know what I mean? Like if like
Mm-hmm.
you should be using language that is like respectful and not going to make anyone feel unwelcome, regardless of like their gender or their religion or their sexuality or like whatever it is. Like if you're in this public gaming space and you're saying something that's like if somebody hears it offhand, even if it's not directed to them and it makes them feel uncomfortable, like you should probably inspect that and take a look at what you're doing. I think local game stores can do a lot for this as well. Like I have some local game stores where the employees are pretty good about reminding people, just like, oh, this is a family establishment. Make sure that like, there's kids here, which there often
Mm.
are. Let's just like keep the discourse positive and reasonable. And people are usually pretty good about it. So I think like often the game store or like some community leaders just kind of calling that out and just giving people like pleasant reminders of like that's not really how we conduct ourselves here is huge, and for players just to be like mindful of it's not just your interaction with people of a minority group, it's also just like generally how you carry yourself because you never know like I think sometimes people say things and like they don't even know that you're there, or they don't even know,
Mm.
like, you know what I mean? They might have their back to you and they don't know that you're behind them and you can hear them, and it's not that you're eavesdropping, you just happen to hear it, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, is this how this game sort of always is? Like, do I want to keep coming here? Like, it just raises a lot of questions, and I think just avoiding that altogether can just make for a better experience for everyone.
So in general, good conduct. I kind of have a saying: if you wouldn't talk to your grandmother like that, it's
Yeah,
not welcome here. You know, would you have that conversation with your grandmother? Probably not. So don't have it here. You know, have it at
yeah,
home. You're in the comfort of your own home, privately.
yeah, exactly. Like if you are truly, you know, if you're, it's totally different setting if you're at a friend's house playing games and
Mm,
you want to have whatever kind of banter, like, you know, that's, I'm all for that. I think that that can be fun, but as
mm,
soon as you're in a public space around other people, you need to be like a little bit more thoughtful.
mindful.
Yeah.
So, what advice do you have for like women who are just now getting into the game, or women who have been in the gaming space for a while, who are trying to reach higher levels of competitive play? Um, yeah, like myself and Melody, and I'm sure hopefully a
Yep.
lot of our
Hmm.
listeners.
Yes.
Yeah, I think just like a big one just in general is perseverance. Just like I think that card games especially, like there's just a lot of swings and a lot that can go wrong,
Hmm.
and it's not always in your control, and just like being determined and persevering through those bad moments is huge. Like I know lots of people who I think are excellent players and they haven't put up like the big results yet, but I have no doubt in my mind that they're, you know, just as good as anybody else. And I think like reminding yourself of that is really important, and like really trying to like push through and just focus on learning and doing the best that you can is important, because I know that it's like you can get bummed out and it can get disappointing and you can be like, oh, I'm not achieving whatever, and I get that and I've been there, and I think just like not focusing too much on that is important. I also think like just try and believe in yourself, like you
Mm,
you can do it. You know, like I think that there's I think there's no reason that you shouldn't feel like you can't compete. You know, just because like you're less represented in the space. Like I don't think that that is true. I think like there's barriers and it can be more difficult socially and things like that. But like just, you know, you're just as good as anybody else, or like you have just as much potential to be good as anybody else. And I think just like remind yourself of that is really important. And then I guess the last one would be just sort of like what I talked about. Like think about who you want to be around, and like finding
mm,
people that are respectful, and that can, and I think like I love what you're doing, like trying to get women together and play together. But I think also just there's lots of there's lots of people who are in this space that are like incredible and accepting and like very supportive and will not treat you any differently. And I think you just need to like find those people that like really click for you and that you really like get along with and like help make you enjoy the game or be a better player, or like whatever it is you're looking for in your flesh and blood experience. Like find that group of people, and that's almost more important than anything else. I think is just like that networking piece, because you know if you're, yeah, the people you play with I think really shape you in a lot of ways as a player as well. They help you grow, they help you test, they help you learn, and they help you have fun with the game. It's kind of, at least for me, it's maybe the biggest part about the game is the social aspect.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm on a competitive team for Flesh and Blood, and like having a team, I'm the only female on the team, but like I love my team so much. They like we travel together to all the tournaments. I probably wouldn't have gone to none of them came to Vegas, but like I probably wouldn't have gone to New Jersey last minute if like they weren't going to be there, say they know how to be like hard on me when I need them to be, and like comforting when I need them to be. They were really great. So I 100% second that. Just like finding your group of people who you can test with and learn from and help uplift, and they can do the same for you, is really important.
Yeah. And I think like sometimes just ask people. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think that people are like trading card games, and especially small ones, like Flesh and Blood, I think is still relatively small despite its success.
Oh yeah.
People are, in my experience, like overwhelmingly like very, very friendly. There are people who aren't, and
Mm.
like maybe you don't want to be around those people, and just take that in stride. But I think a lot of people, like, if you ask them like, hey, do you want to play games, like they'll probably at least play a few games with you, and like maybe it'll click, maybe it won't, but like don't be afraid to just put yourself out there and ask, and I don't know, you might be surprised.
Yeah, definitely. Get involved. That was kind of like the I really really loved Flesh and Blood, and then I got on Flesh and Blood Twitter and like met more people
Mhm.
outside of my just like local community. Just like everyone on Twitter, I I love when people interact with me on Twitter, like message me and set up games and stuff. Like you go on there and everyone worldwide is just like excited to see this game grow. And
Yeah.
I mean, you can tell that they're excited and genuine and good people and willing to help. So definitely like put yourself out there, get involved.
Mhm.
Great advice. That's how
Cool.
Melody and I met.
It is. And that's how we met you,
Yeah.
Yuki.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And like most of my testing team right now are not people that are like local to my area or people that I knew. Like none of them are people. Only one person that I test with is somebody I knew before Flesh and Blood. Like everyone else is people I've met in the game, and a lot of them are not local to me. And I've like met online or through friends of friends or like kind of a thing. So yeah,
I forgot to ask you actually in our previous section, you've joined a new team that's headed by Jason, right? Is that right?
yeah, that's right. So I've been testing with Jason and Justin and some of the other New Zealand crew. We have a few people in America as well. Sean, who's like American-ish. He's from New Zealand, but he lives in New York area.
So he's a Kiwi. Okay, come on, Yuki.
Yeah. And then yeah, well, I just mean like he's technically in America, but he is a
Ish.
Kiwi.
Okay, yes, yes.
Um, and then Will Harrison, who's also he is American. So um, yeah, so I've been testing with them. The It can be challenging to align the time zones. Like there's not always
Mm.
overlap, so I have to play like outside of the group as well. But yeah, no, it's a good group. We have fun. There's like lots of good joking around and banter. Yeah, so shout out to the team CVK. They're
Yeah.
awesome.
What is the acronym?
Oh, don't ask me what it stands for. I don't
Oh,
actually
okay.
know. They keep
I did
joking
ask
about
on
it
Twitter and
standing
they
for
wouldn't
different
say.
things, and now I don't know. But I think we're on team. I think we're still on team CVK. I think Jason settled on that one.
Awesome. So last question for this section for you, Yuki, is someone who identifies with both the female or the women community, women in the community, and with the LGBTQ community. What do you hope the future of Flesh and Blood looks like for these underrepresented groups?
I just hope that we see more people participating and feeling like they are welcome to join and participate at really like all levels of play, whether that's like like PvE in the future or armories or like callings and pro-tours. Like I hope that like across the board we just see more participation and like more people feeling like they can get into the game and like they'll have a space here, like if they want it. I think that would be huge. Or like having people feel like they can. Like I think a lot of it is also like if some people have a good experience, like you might get friends into it, and that can like open the door for more people. So I'd like to see that kind of like natural growth of like people coming to the game and being like, no, this is like a good space to be whoever you are, whatever that looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Hmm.
You are obviously like very well known and renowned in the community, and you're someone who's always posting their winning deck techs or your deck lists, your strategies, um, things that most players look at like closely guarded secrets. So what makes you like so willing to share everything going on behind your deck and your games on Twitter with everyone?
The world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess there's like a few things to that. Um, One, I guess like because I came from Magic, that has like a huge, like very developed scene. There's like a lot of incredible content by like very prolific players that really know their stuff and really kind of just like put everything on the line and tell you like exactly what they think. Like they might not be able to tell you like this is exactly the deck that my team is bringing to this event because it's like belongs to the team, but they will like genuinely tell you like what they think about the format, what they think like how the decks are positioned, or like in draft what their strategy is or what they think the fortune cards are. And I just think it's like a shame that Flesh and Blood doesn't have so much of that. And I think part of it is just like from being a new game, but like I guess after winning nationals, I was like, well, I could be part of that. Like I don't have to wait for someone else to do it. Like that could be me. And I know that like being on the other side, like that makes such a huge difference. Just like learning about the game and getting into it. So I thought it was really cool to be able to like, give back and do that. Um, Probably also helps that like in my real life job, I'm a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and I see a lot of overlap between sort of like the content creation or like deck profiles and teaching, where I'm sort of like sharing what I know, and that's something that I just generally enjoy. Um, but yeah, I guess I've never felt like I also think sometimes people get like too hung up on like secrets. Like
Mm.
if you're just listening, I'm putting secrets in air quotes here because sometimes I don't really think that secrets are that secret. You know what I mean? Like they're
Mm-hmm.
like occasionally like yeah, maybe you really like if I was like on like the Keno list for the Pro Tour, like yeah, I would want to keep that secret because there's like a huge element of surprise.
Yeah.
Mm.
But like I remember Everfest came out and I posted like I was posting my Viscerai list and I'm just like I just feel like this is obvious. Like maybe not like the exact setup that I have, but it's just like Hayden just won Viscerai or just won Australian Nats with Viscerai. The deck's pretty established. There's these new Everfest cards that are like obviously very good in the deck. I'm just gonna put them in and like there's like I can treat it like a secret, but like people are gonna figure it out. Like give people respect, you know? Like I always
Mm.
like to assume that like there's lots of good players in the community and in the game and they're gonna figure it out. It's not like I think sometimes people like to feel like they're smart or they're clever and yeah, like you'll be surprised. Like people know these things. Like you know, like I remember in some of the early days of Everfest, like people were kind of like on about how like they had this secret Viscerai deck that was so good. I'm like, well, I've been seeing people at ProQuest who are in the middle tables like doing exactly what you're talking about. Is it really a secret? I don't know. So I think people get a little hung up on it, and I just like love that sharing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Awesome.
you for sharing,
Yeah.
Yuki.
Okay. I think we have to move on to listener questions. So,
This is from Schwartzy1. Yuki, how many games do you play until you decide that a card is not good or a nice tech? You kind of covered that a little bit through your I
Yeah.
was going to say hypodermic calculated. That's not it. Hypothermogenic, is that it?
Hypergeometric.
Okay.
Yeah, so a little bit different. Yeah, I can touch on it briefly. So I would say it depends on cards that are supposed to be. It depends on how narrow the card is. If it's a card that is specifically for exactly one matchup, I can probably figure it out pretty quickly, like a handful of games, because the slots in your deck are very valuable. And if you're devoting like even 3 slots in your deck for one specific matchup, like that's a huge part of your sideboard. And I want that card to be obviously very effective in that matchup. Otherwise, like, what's the point? Like, it's not worth the slot. The more challenging ones to identify are cards that have applications in multiple matchups and like might give you a small edge in like a few of them. And those might take like a larger number of reps in the deck to really like figure out how much it's impacting things. But I think that as a good rule of thumb, like how you feel, like pay attention to how you feel about that card throughout the match, both like when you draw it and when you're thinking about your hands. And that gives you like pay attention to that feeling. And I think it's important because like I've had cards where I'm just like Icequake, it's like I always want to draw Icequake. As long as I have arrows, like I want to see this card in my hand. Like if it's in my hand, I'm happy it's there so long as I have arrows. And if it's not in my hand, I'm like, it'd be a pretty good card to have in my hand right now. So like that's like a really good indication. Or if you like are drawing a card and you're just like, why is this in my hand? And it's like that repeatedly, that's like a really good sign that maybe that card is like not great. Or if you're feeling it's kind of like, this is fine. Like the card's probably fine. Like your gut probably tells you a lot about how important that card is in the match.
Awesome. Yeah. I like the going off of your gut and your feelings because
Yeah.
you're just speaking and now I'm thinking about
Same.
like my games and I'm like, yeah, that why is that card in my deck? You're right. uh, all right. So our next question comes from Laura and Laura asks, what do you hope to see down the line in terms of cards?
I'm just sort of excited to see what they bring next. Like LSS has done an awesome job with this game, so I'm just sort of like excited in general. My secret like wish list is I don't know if it's gonna happen, but I'd really like to see just like ice arrow that is just like a 1 for 5 that has the ice type so that there can be more consistency in the deck. I think it would actually be very powerful. I could see like only one pitch of it, but something like that, just like an on-right arrow that has talent subtypes to help the fuse heroes, I think would be huge. Because like you have like this like conundrum of like I don't have enough ice cards and arrow cards at the same time, and my deck is like always inherently a little inconsistent. So something like that I think would be really cool, where it's not like a power level bump. It's not like, oh my god, they drew this card and now they run me over. It's more of a like consistency and sort of an increase. So yeah, I think cards that give you like more options in deck building and more consistency in general are just like nice from the game. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we got maybe 5 questions from Michael. Michael is a viewer and a Twitter friend that posts lots of questions for our for our guests. So we've chosen 2 this time, and I'm going to start from the second one. Now, please don't talk about pickles. I'm just going to say that in advance. So
That was directed towards me, not you.
yeah, but I know that there's been a conversation on Twitter with Yuki and pickles as well, and you, Elaine. So, if you had a snack named after Yuki, what would it be and what would it be made out of? Random question.
Yeah, so I think if there's a snack named after me, like some kind of like Yuki shaved ice dessert kind of snack would make like a lot of sense. Plus I also really enjoy those kinds of desserts. They're just like super refreshing, especially in the summer, which is like right now. It's really warm. So yeah,
And it goes with Lexi.
Yeah,
it does.
It does, actually, yeah.
Yes, it uses with Lexi. Love it.
That makes me want shaved ice. I almost got a snow cone yesterday and then I didn't. Now you said that and I want one again today.
That was me last night. I was like, oh, I want shaved ice, but it's 1 a.m.
we we are in like a heat advisory this week. It's like 105 all week, and I'm
Ugh.
sweltering. So
How
shaved
what is that
ice.
in New Zealand weather?
Melody, you know I don't know.
Well, we've
I
tried this
also don't know because
comparison.
I also use Celsius, but I think it's like got to be like 40s, I think.
What?
I think so.
let
Like
me let me
105 is
see.
really
It's
105 is
really
really hot.
like that's
I know it's a
ridiculous.
lot.
I'm looking it up right now. We're taking a what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I
The
know I've been in the
hottest.
States when it's like in the hundreds and it's miserable. Like I think Vegas was in the
So
really.
it's 40.5 repeating.
Yeah.
That's death. That is
It's
just
really hot.
insane.
It's
It's
really,
really, really hot.
really bad. All right, last question. This one is again from Michael M. Shredda on Twitter. Says, what would your ideal hero class ability, maybe health, intellect, be? What would your ideal hero be?
Yeah, so this is a tough one. I have a couple ideas of heroes that I think would be cool. I don't know if it's like so fleshed out as like an entire hero or deck, but like one of them is just maybe it's like a bit of a cop out, but I know in like the hero handbook they have the necromancer, and I've always liked kind of like graveyard
Mhm.
recursion and board
Mm-hmm.
state related things. So I think that that could be like a really cool class. But maybe like something a bit more specific and in the like more in the spirit of the question is like I think it'd be cool if they had a ranger. Like in ranger I feel like often like the arsenal and being able to manipulate the arsenal is like such a like it lets you do a lot of things and is very important. And there's like also like cards like traps that are like kind of cool conceptually but haven't really they kind of missed the mark. And I think like having a ranger that had something like a once per turn instant to reload, that you could like reload a trap, and assuming you have an empty arsenal you could reload a trap and play it. I don't know that like the current traps are like good enough right now for that to be a thing, but I think something kind of like focused that's like a little bit more mid-rangey and does get to like use the arsenal at instant speed in that way and has like some special effects coming from arsenal could be both flavorful and like pretty interesting. I don't know too much about like the intellect and the health. It's like I'll leave that up to LSS to balance and figure out. But
Give Lexi 7 intellect.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, seven.
Seven
It's
intellect.
fine. What's the worst
She
that could
wins.
happen?
That'd be fun. I think the necromancer would be cool too. I kind of
Oh, yeah.
expected to see a little bit more graveyard interaction with uprising than we got. Like
Yeah.
Fi has like the once the instant to retrieve the phoenix
Mhm.
flame from the graveyard, but like with the ash and the making of dragons, I wrongfully assumed and expected it to be kind of more of like a graveyard interaction, rather than like
Yeah,
you're pitching to make
totally.
ash.
And
But
like Levia, like kind
Mm.
of has that. Like it looks like she's that kind of a deck, and then you try and build her and you're like, oh, it's like it's just not quite
oh
it's not
no.
quite there. Like that's not really quite what she does. Like it's sort of like it felt like there's like a package there, but it didn't quite hit the mark.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it's like one of the like last like game components that I know of from coming from like my little experience with Magic that like we still haven't really touched on or explored in Flesh and Blood. So
Yeah.
I think that would be cool to see, and I think Necromancer would be the perfect class to do it.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
Revive everything.
before we completely wrap things up, we have one more question that we like to ask every guest that we have on the podcast, and that is there any like specific topic or content that you would like to see the Pitch Perfect Pod produce in the future?
Um, I mean, honestly, I've been a big fan of like the current format, just listening to the two of you and like having guests on sometimes. I think one of the things that I'm like the most excited for that you've been working on quietly is just like getting players together and like organizing that like that sort of like meet and greet or social space. I think is like really, really exciting. And I think not to like put pressure on you guys, but um, I know that like Magic the Gathering has like something called Venus and Mercury League, which is
Mm-hmm.
basically like for
Oh,
not just like women, but like people of like gender minorities, I believe is how they phrased it, to play. And like it's like a league, and I think I believe they cast at least like the finals. I don't know if they cast the whole league, but they do like the finals of it, and it's like it's just like a really cool community run space for people to like get involved, and there's some like very good players that play it in as well. So I think like not that you have to do that, but I hope that like Flesh and Blood can have something like that is sort of like
Yeah.
the dream for me.
Is the casting done by like underrepresented gender minorities also?
I
You
think,
said like they cast like the finals.
yeah, I'm trying to remember. I believe that at least partially. I can't remember if the whole casting team is or not, but I know like for sure. Like I've seen like Hayu on their casting before, and
Mm-hmm.
she's awesome. So yeah, I think that's like a great idea, but I think like casting, I think regardless of who's casting, it's like still a cool event.
Oh
But I
yeah.
think there are people like that that can cast. That's like a pretty logical fit.
Yeah. I mean that's definitely really awesome. I'm gonna have to like Google that, look more into
so
it.
that's called Venus and Mercury. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
that's really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, it's really really cool. So I hope that we can get something like some kind of like analog to that would be really cool.
Well, hold that thought, Yuki, because we're having a team meeting, Elaine and I, this afternoon during my lunch hour,
We
and
are.
yeah, it's for an in-person event that I'm looking to organise in New Zealand, but an online one we've chatted about, and with Kiki as well,
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
a league. Watch the space.
I'll
Now that Yuki said we've got
keep
to
it
do it,
in
we've got to
mind.
do it, Elaine.
I know, right? What
Yeah,
Yuki
you
I was
says
going to be
heard it
goes.
like,
here
yep.
first. Elaine and Melody are committed to. No, I'm
Yes.
just kidding.
Yep. Thanks, Yuki.
Yeah, I think that'd be cool. I really like 100%. I love everyone on the casting teams that Flesh and Blood has. I'm really good friends with a lot of them actually. But I would love to see like some women or and non-binaries like casting, just some different representation on casting teams. I think would be
Mm,
really cool. Just while we're on the topic, 'cause I don't think I'm
Yeah.
the woman to do it. I don't think I'd be good at
neither.
casting, but
No.
I'd
Yuki,
like to
you'd be
see it.
great.
Yeah, but
I'd love to do some casting, but I also like playing,
I
so it's
say
like
you've
split in
got to be
half.
Yeah.
playing though.
You'll be at the top tables. There's no time for you to
I
be
said there's no
casting.
time to cast.
But maybe I could do a Matt Rogers and just like sneak in there once
Yes.
I scrub out, or like, once I miss the cut or whatever. Yeah.
That'd be yeah, that'd be awesome.
Alexis, if you're watching, kia ora. Yuki up.
All right, thank you so much for coming on and talking with
Yes,
us, Yuki.
Yuki.
This was truly a joy and very insightful. But for anyone who's listening and doesn't know where to find you, where can people do that? I want to give you the opportunity to plug everything you're involved in.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. This has been a pleasure. Fan of the pod, and it's nice chatting with you too. Finally, like getting to sit down and chat. Um, if you want to find me, I'm on Twitter. It's just my name at Yuki Lee Bender. Um, I also write for Red Riot Games. There's articles posted on there, sort of sporadically. I don't have like a. They're very flexible with my writing schedule, so I write. Sometimes I write a lot of articles. Sometimes I don't write very many, but there are articles that go up there. And I guess recently there's a couple articles on the FabTCG page as well. So
Yes.
I don't know if that's continuing or not, but there is a couple if you want to take a peek. They're draft related. So yeah.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you. One more quick reminder before we stop recording that we are currently running a charity fundraiser with Paper Collective. So there's like a playmat, The Women of Volcor. You can go buy that and donating a portion of those proceeds to the Global Fund for Women. So I'll put the link in the show notes. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks
This
for
was
joining us,
this was great.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.